guys,
congratulations!
congratulations on the winning design. And you just entered an amazing group of people who space architects are. So welcome and congratulations.
Congratulations to the winners of the My City Design Challenge 2020. We're very excited for this project and we're very excited to collaborate. So please join this very great community of space architects and biodesigners. Hello everyone, my name is Layla and together with Monika, Brandić, Lipińska, we're going to tell you about the benefits of biomaterial for space and Earth architecture. So we're both PhD students from the Hub for Biotechnology in the Built Environment at Newcastle University in the UK. My PhD research is on rhythmic buildings that adapt through time using biomaterials. Monika is looking at the material practices for construction of living habitation in extreme and extraterrestrial environments. So today we're going to talk to you about challenges of building on Earth and space, and how we're going to face these challenges relating to the 3 pillars of sustainability. So the 3 pillars of sustainability are the social, environmental, and economical sustainability. Looking at the historical challenges we've had in architecture, we can see that these challenges have reflected in the architectural principles and in the use of specific materials throughout time. So these challenges have varied over time as well as geographically. And you can see from these indigenous architectural solutions that they used exclusively local materials, which led to bioclimatic and biophilic architecture, which are principles we're still using today. However, we're facing new challenges, and some of these new challenges are new destinations. So we're going to further than our Earth and going to lower Earth orbit, the Moon, or Mars. Some other new challenges are global aspects, such as biodiversity being gradually destroyed, global warming, and resource depletion. So to address these new challenges, we need a new way of thinking. And so what we're going to tell you about and show you are some examples of using engineered living materials to address some of these challenges. And so the first challenge, Monika is going to tell you about it.
Okay, thanks, Layla. So one of the biggest challenges when it comes to built industry is transportation. And this challenge is touching both economical and environmental sustainability pillars. The way how we construct right now on Earth causes us to transport materials. On Earth, it's either with ships or with planes. And if we'll go to space to build on Mars or on the Moon, we will need rockets. But doesn't matter, depends on which transportation system we will use. They're all causing one big impact, which is environmental footprint. In transportation, together with raw material extraction and the production of materials, is one of the biggest causes of CO2 emissions. So we have to keep that in mind when designing. The other aspect is the cost of transportation. You can see on this chart that the cost of transportation is directly proportional to the distance that material has to cover, and it already exceeds thousands of euros. And when it comes to space architecture, when we have to go to other planets or to the Moon, the cost of transportation dramatically raises, with a cost of sending one brick to only low Earth orbit being around $10,000 or $30,000. So when we design, especially for space, the materials that we use have to be especially light and compact. And there are a couple of approaches how we can build in space. The first one is called build it on Earth, launch it to space. So all of the components from which we're going to construct space habitats are built and prepared on Earth, which is very reliable. And then they're assembled directly, whether it's an orbit or in the future, maybe the Moon or Mars. But there are also downsides of this approach. With the biggest one is that everything that we're going to use for building the habitat has to be brought from Earth. So it makes the launch costs huge. And then in case of any emergency and any need for spare parts, they have to be delivered from Earth as well. Or if you want to develop the habitat or make the base bigger, then we also need to have supplies from Earth. So it's very dependent on transportation. The other approach is in situ resource utilization. So similarly, as we were doing it on Earth, when we were building architecture from local resources, whether it was stone or ice or mud, we can use this approach for building extraterrestrial habitats. So on the moon, we can build with lunar regolith, and on Mars with Martian regolith. And similarly as buildings and as vernacular buildings on Earth, we don't only will be building from local materials, but also try to use environment as our advantage. So the vernacular architecture was differing depending on the environment where it's built because of the material, but also the solutions that are applied in the building. Whether it's using the wind or fighting the high temperatures or humidity levels, they were different in different environments. But this approach also has some drawbacks. The first one is that the resources are limited. We can only use as much as we have. And then it's increasing climate change calls for better mitigation and adaptation strategies. When it comes to space, this approach needs first infrastructure preparations for the construction of the base. And to use the regolith, we would need heavy-duty robots and rovers first to gather it, then to processes, whether it's 3D printing or solar sintering, and then robots in some cases to assemble the whole habitat. So it doesn't really make the cost of launch smaller because we will need all of these robots to build a base, even if it's using local resources. And the other drawback is that the process is quite complicated. And when it comes to space, there is a lot of room for errors. Like we can lose a power, the robots can lose power, or we can lose connection with robots which are building on the moon or Mars. So there is a question, how to keep mass as low as possible to minimize launch costs. And the solution is life, using life as a technology. And so now with this presentation, we want to show you how life and biotechnology can respond to these challenges in architecture, whether it's for building in space or on Earth. So the first challenge that it's very close to transportation challenge is a low mass. So imagine deploying the seeds of a plant and let the rest grow by itself in a controlled environment. It could be possible to implement similar behavior to architectural designs and multiple purpose infrastructure. So we can take with us, whether if it's on Earth or in space, just a little bit, just as much as seeds of plant or some kind of habitat, seed it, plant it, and then they just grow into a habitat. So we don't need to take all of the materials with us. The other idea of using growth is all-in-one self-growing system. So instead of taking all of the equipment, utilities, furnishing, and fixtures, we can design it together within the expandable shell of the habitat. So when the habitat itself grows, the fixtures are growing itself within the habitat. So it's all in one system, which can compete with upmass prefabricated structures that are much heavier than this approach. The other challenge is the need for designing circulatory system or closed loop. And this is especially relevant in space architecture, but also on Earth architecture, especially with the shift to circular economy and this movement of trying to eliminate waste and use all of the resources. And one of example of such projects is MELISA project, which is project done in a collaboration with European Space Agency, which is trying to develop a closed system, which is inspired by Earth ecosystem. And the idea is that the system will allow for recovering of food, water, and oxygen for organic waste, carbon dioxide, and minerals, using the light as a source of energy. to promote biological photosynthesis. So it's taking from nature, it's learning from nature, so we can use it for applying this continual use of resources. And it's aiming for a total conversion of the organic waste and CO2 to oxygen, water, and food. The other example of applying these circulatory systems, it's within a project called Microarchitecture of Planet, which is NASA's project of growing habitat on Mars or Moon out of mycelium. And this project proposes a use of circulatory system to deliver nutrients to preceded microbes or spores embedded within cells or modules to grow in place. The integral bioreactor could supply oxygen for breathing and hydrogen for fuel and radiation protection, and biomass for food and more building materials. So it's an example of like kind of living building that uses its own resources, and it doesn't produce waste, it just taking advantage of the resources that it produces. The other challenge is, can we design buildings that are self-healing? And the example of such strategy can be Ice on Mars project by Layla, which is proposing to build a habitat on Mars out of ice, where ice is it's using the environment to heal and reinforce the structure. So on Mars, the difference in temperatures between day and night are very big, and then the ice constantly would melt and freeze and melt and freeze. And by this process, the ice is actually reinforced. And in the case of potential cracks on the structure, the melting ice would fill the cracks and then freeze again, and it will reinforce and heal the whole structure. The other example of such strategy is self-healing concrete, which works in the way that there are bacteria embedded within the concrete. And in case of any crack, the humidity level changes and the crack becomes more humid, which triggers the bacteria to precipitate carbon. And in this way, they fill the crack and heal the concrete, heal the whole structure. The other challenge is energy generation. Can building generate their own energy? And the example of energy generation is microalgae, which is very widely used right now in a lot of different scales. On the architectural applications, there are, for example, window panels that are produce electricity and heat and provide shading, such as in big house, which is first algae powered building. There are proposed bioreactors that produce biofuels, and there is a growing number of product design projects using algae for air purification or energy production. And the other example of generating electricity or generating energy using biology is a project called Bioreactors from a Hub for Biotechnology in Built Environment, which is proposing the use of household waste, such as carbon and paper, which would act as a carbon source, together with microbes, even maybe the microbes that can be found in this waste, as an activating enzyme. And by this mixture, they undergo certain chemical processes, and the product would be biofuel together with other bioproducts such as cardboard, jelly, or vanilla taste. The next challenge is self-assembly. Is it possible for structures to self-assemble? And then the example is again Microarchitecture of Planet project, which is proposing construction using mycelium, which is growing within an environmental shell that provides the right conditions for the mycelium growth. So the idea is that the bag with planted mycelium and nutrients would be delivered on Mars. and then robots deliver water together with CO2. And the bag starts to unfold, which activates algae expanding form. The algae grows and produces oxygen that fills valve bladder. And then the bladder is filled by algae. And then on top of the algae, mycelium together with Bacillus subtilis grow and use algae as a nutrient. So in the end, the whole base constructs itself, it self-assembles using the process of growth of mycelium and algae. And the other example of self-assembly is self-assembly on micro level, which is synthetic morphogenesis. And such self-assembly is when elements find the energetically stable structure in an environment, such as air, vacuum, or water. In this example, we can see a zoomed version of self-assembly of a protein where each part lock into each other to create a 3D structure. And that's a project by MIT. But also HBB is working on similar structures. The other challenge is radiation protection. And this challenge is specifically important for space architecture, where if we're designing for Mars or the moon, we don't have magnetic field, we don't really have atmosphere. So we have to protect astronauts from radiation that is constantly bombarding the surface. And for now, most of the concept for space architecture are proposing at least 3 meter wide layer of regolith to cover the habitat to protect astronauts from radiation. We're trying to propose other solutions using biology as a solution of how we can think about it a little bit differently. So one of the ideas is the use of melanin-rich fungi, which has been found for the first time in Chernobyl. And this fungi is growing towards radiation. So this is an example of a structure or nature where it's working together with the environment and not against the environment. So radiation is not stopping the growth, it's helping the growth. And the melanin within the fungi, it's actually having radiation protection capabilities. So it can be used for future habitats. The other example could be bacterial cellulose, which has been tested on the surface of outside of International Space Station during the EXPOSE-R mission by European Space Agency. It's been tested on a kombucha SCOBY bacteria cultures. And what is interesting is that the bacteria are producing layers of cellulose. They're producing more layers and faster when they're under the radiation bombardment to protect the bacteria from the radiation. So again, it's growing better with radiation than without it. So we can maybe also use it for our own purposes. And connection with the external environment is a challenge where we're using bacterial cellulose. We can use bacterial cellulose due to the fact that it's translucent, or it can be maybe transparent. So it has really good radiation protection capabilities. It's better than water, actually. So it can be used as a radiation protection for the habitat, maybe instead, or maybe mixed together with lunar regolith, but instead of different than the regolith, it's translucent. So it will let the light to pass into the structure. So the astronauts will be constantly kept in the safe environment, but there will be this possibility to see the sunlight. So that's an example where we use biology for structural reasons to enhance the structural properties, but also it has a crucial role in helping with enhancing the psychological comfort at astronauts, which will be the next challenge that will be presented by Layla.
Thanks, Monika. So this challenge as psychological comfort, I wanted to introduce the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we're all familiar with. And on the bottom of the pyramid, you have the physiological needs. And then on the top tiers, you have the psychological and the self-fulfillment needs. And this pyramid has been adapted a lot throughout the years, mostly in the psychological field, so focusing on the top tiers of the pyramid. However, I found out that the field of physiology has adapted quite a lot since the 70s when this framework was made. So what I did is I adapted the physiologic tiers, and I made a distinction between collective needs of survival and individual needs. And so this pyramid could be used as a framework to prioritize design decisions to address social challenges. And so I'm going to highlight a few of these social challenges. And we've seen already a few physiological challenges that have been explained by Monika. And I'm going to focus on the psychological ones. So the organic nature of material could help us. It could help astronauts because living and working in the same environment can be quite stressful, as we've all noticed during this COVID crisis, where we're mostly confined in our own space, where we live, work out and do everything. So it can be quite boring and straining on the well-being. So using the organic nature of biomaterials would be able to fine-tune our tactile environment as well as having responsive characteristics. So for example, we have mycelium, which has similar function to styrofoam, but it could be stained to look like wood and feel like wood. What's another interesting aspect is the circadian rhythms of biomaterials. So the circadian rhythm regulates the sleep and wake cycles and the level of alertness in human beings, but it also helps plants during the photosynthesis during the day and cellular respiration at night. And so these rhythm really dictates our whole day, and they are really revolving around these daily and seasonal cycles. And the circadian rhythm needs a time cue, or so-called Zeitgeber. And this phenomenon is usually due to daylight. And so we can see the difference in daylight temperature and daylight intensities. And these cues are really helpful for humans to regulate this circadian rhythm or biological clock. And so bringing plants and organisms with their own clock might be able to well, reduce the strain we have from living indoors. So our next challenge is sensory stimulation, which I've already highlighted a bit on the previous slides. But living in the same habitat over and over, we really need this multi-sensory aspects of nature that we usually experience outdoor, and we need to bring that inside. So nature is really good at translating complexity and variety. So bringing those into the built environment would enable us to have color variation, form complexity, as well as light variation, pattern variation. Terrain complexity and haptic surfaces are really important for the well-being of humans indoors. Another challenge to address is the response to nature nostalgia. So we know that being increasingly living in cities or living in space, we will have this nostalgia for nature, which is actually called biophilia, where we have this biological attachment with nature. And so biophilic design is trying to re-implement nature within our living habitats. So it has a really positive effect on our well-being. For example, viewing nature reduces anxiety and stress and increases directed attention. So another challenge is purposeful and the sense of purpose and wanted to contribute something to life in general. So one of the examples we're using here is the Eden ISS project, where they've built this lab facilities where they were growing plants in Antarctica. And on the back of the first picture, you can see the base where researchers are living and working, which is quite far away from the other base where they're growing food, lettuce as in research. But this didn't chase away their feelings. They really wanted to take care of these plants because they really found a sense of purpose, and taking care and nurturing these plants really made them want to get up in the morning. And so although greenhouses are really important for the whole process of making your own food and the closed loop systems we were talking about before, it also gives a sense of purpose and really increase the psychological comfort of astronauts. And so we talk a lot about these challenges and how biomaterials can help find solutions to these challenges. However, there are some drawbacks. So biomaterials are highly dependent on environmental conditions, which can be seen as a benefit as well, but it must be really well researched because there's a high risk of contamination. So although it delivers us very beautiful images, like the first one where we see contaminated mycelium from Monika, and then in the middle we can see some contaminated bacterial cellulose scoby, it does change the properties and the aspects of the materials. So this is something that needs to be researched outside of the lab when you're taking your biomaterial within a wider ecosystem, and how do those organisms react and live together. Another aspect that it has a really low TRL at the moment. A lot of the biomaterials working, for example, with the hub are from TRL 1 to maybe 7, but mostly the conceptual and research lab phase. So to scale up and actually heighten the TRL, we need a lot more research. So to conclude this presentation, I think we've shown that biomaterials and engineered living materials present a great opportunity for economical, environmental, and social sustainability, both for Earth and space applications. So using these biomaterials enables us to harvest the properties of both the local environment and existing organisms to the advantage of the design. So space architecture has pushed us to rethink our design approach for extraterrestrial buildings. But using biomaterial pushes us to rethink our design approach to benefit both Earth and space applications. So the potential to bridge the gap between nano and micro level onto the macro scale will push the field forward, in our opinions. So I really want to thank you very much for listening to our presentation. And we want to thank the Hub for Biotechnology in the built environment for enabling us to do this very exciting research. Thank you very much.